Let's all get a songbook and turn to page 549. 549. I'm pressing on the upward way, new heights I'm gaining every day, still praying as I onward bound, Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's table and a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. My heart has no desire to stay where doubts arise and fears dismay, though some may dwell where these abound. My prayer, my aim is higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's table and a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. I want to scale the utmost height and catch a gleam of glory bright, but still I'll pray till heaven I'm found. Lord, lead me on to higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's table and a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Brother Kermit, would you pray for us? Man, it is good to see everybody. This is Wednesday night, and we're getting bigger crowds over here on Wednesday. I like that. It'll fill up a little more in the summertime, because in the summer we won't have near as many people working over there next door. We'll still have Wednesday night kids club. I don't know what they call it, but it won't be the Masters Club part of it. But we're glad you're here, and hope you've had a great week. Hope things are going well. Many of our young men from Good News Camp, well, this will be their last day, because I think Friday's their last day of school. So I was over, and some of them looked excited about being out and getting out of school. Some of them didn't look too excited, but some of them said they're coming back. I said good, because some of them older men over there need you guys to keep them straightened out. So, but you pray for these young men. They've done a good job, and we've been glad to have them with us, and just pray that the Lord continues to work with them. We appreciate them. And we appreciate you being here. We've got several things going on in the next few. We do have graduation here going on here the 23rd. I think that's a Tuesday. I'm not sure, but if you notice out front, we got flowers already. Aaron used to always tell me, you're not supposed to put flowers out before Mother's Day. They will freeze. So we're going to see if that's true, because nothing's worse than having Mother's Day and a bunch of dirt still out there. And so we want everybody to invite moms, invite non-moms, invite dads, non-dads, just invite everybody and see what happens, and see, we'll have a good service on Sunday. We're looking forward to that. Seeing what else I'm forgetting here. I don't see anything, so there's probably more announcements, but I'll remember them later. Let me update you on some things going on the prayer list. Brother Tom Madden got a bad report. He went in yesterday and they run dye through him or whatever, and in the process they found more cancer in his lungs now. So they're supposed to be calling him. They may have already called him today. I haven't heard from him, but the doctor said, they can still deal with the liver part, but they're going to have to do something else. So I don't know if they'll deal with both at the same time or what, but I know it's very discouraging for him, but he's still fighting. So you keep praying for him. Something will happen. Something will change in his favor one of these days. So you pray for him. Mr. Pitts, we've had some folks over at his house. We took him a bed yesterday so he can get in and out a little bit easier. It's harder for her to get him in and out of bed. So we took him a bed, and I think they finally got everything working on it today. And Mr. Hawk went over and fixed her clothesline, and so I think they're doing okay. But continue to pray for them. People going. Until you've been through it, you can't really, you don't really know how to describe what it's like. It just takes over your world is what it does. And so they need a lot of prayer and need to know the people's behind them and praying for them. And then Aaron asked me his let's see, Caitlin's mother, Kathy Campbell, put her on the sick list number 4. She's got some sort of kidney disease, and her grandmother, which is up toward or down toward the bottom, Sharon Dunn, she also has kidney disease. So he asked that we pray for those. I told you Sunday, Brother Troy has had something. He got some kind of a virus 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he can't shake it, and so he's still fighting it. But he asked that we continue to pray for him. What's going on in here? Things we need to talk about. Now tonight, just so you'll know, I want to tell you what we're scheduled. We're going to get some more activities scheduled because we need it. Tonight, because it's the last night for the men at camp or the boys at camp, I thought they would do a big meal, but they said a lot of times they've already snacked and they don't want to eat, so they're doing gym night tonight. They're going to have competitions and dodgeball. I don't know what all they're going to have. They get points for this, points for that. But next week they're going to be gone. So next week we get the gym. So next week we'll have a dodgeball game for all you folks, and we'll do layups and some things like that, drills, a few things, and we'll have a competition, see who wins. So I thought that would be fun. So I'm sure. Now you don't have to sign up. Just show up next week, and we'll see how it goes. So. Half of you will stay home. I'm not telling the truth there. I mean, you shouldn't lie from the pulpit, I guess, but yes. What we're going to do, I think we could do this. We could line Brother Price up on one wall, and I'll give everybody else a dodgeball just to throw at him. How about that? Well, maybe we won't do that, but for just a little bit, you felt like a kid at the end, didn't you? And you wanted to get in on it. So that was my goal, just to make you feel like a kid for just a minute. And it'll go away fast. Don't worry about it. What else is going on? Brother? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Judy Lanham, continue to pray for her. She comes home from rehab. A little bit tougher when you get home. Family members are not near as good at keeping things organized as it ought to be. Yes, sir? Well, he told me yesterday that it was in his lungs, but he hadn't called anybody else yet, so he didn't. I didn't. I waited till the day before I told anybody. So, yeah. Okay. Anybody got a good story you need to tell while we're waiting on somebody to think of something we need to pray about? Well, there ought to be stories out there. We got Sister Diana on the write-ins, but she's got both eyes fixed, and she come in, didn't know who anybody was at church. Everybody looked so much younger, she said. And yeah, everybody looked a little brighter. Okay, I was going to tell you where to open your Bibles, but I forgot where. Psalms 84, how about that? Psalms chapter number 84. Again, if you're not used to being in here, we will come back to that prayer list at the end of the service, and we'll pray over it, and then we'll be dismissed. We mentioned a little bit last week about mountaintops, and I was kind of amazed when I seen how many people visit the Smoky Mountains every year. In the high millions, several million people go there, and everybody likes mountaintops, but not just physical mountaintops, but we like those spiritual mountaintops too. Times when it seems like the presence of God is just so very real to us. And I wish I could say we could always stay on the mountaintop, but unfortunately that's not the way it does happen. And in the physical world, you've got to come down off of that mountain sometimes and go back to work. Isn't that awful? You go on vacation for the toughest thing is to take a week vacation from something and then try to go back to work. It's almost depressing sometimes, but you got to do that. You got to come down off that mountain, or get the kids back to school, or take care of some business down at the house or something. But that's the physical world. And then in the spiritual world, we leave mountaintops because of life. Life happens to us, and we get busy with things that we need to do, and then we find out, you know what? I didn't even read the Bible yesterday. I didn't even do yesterday morning. I didn't get into some of them shorter devotions, and then you find your days are flying by, and sometimes you get at the end of the day you're too tired to talk to God because you've got a moment now, but you're just too tired, and you don't get that done. And then I know this happens because I talk to people all the time, and then you get to feeling guilty because you think, you know what, I'm not doing what I should do. And I've told you this before. A fellow we used to have here in our church, he was a good man, but he would always come and tell me, he said, pray for me that I'll start praying more. Like I need to pray more. And finally I just told him, just do it. Don't just talk about you need to do it, do it. But we do that. We get to feeling guilty because we think, well, you know what, I'm not the Christian I ought to be. And so then it gets in our head that I kind of feel bad getting around people down at church because we feel like they can kind of see right through it, right down to the soul, and it's not a very pretty thing. And so we start skipping church. This is what happens to people. And what happened, I'll tell you what, life happens. That's what happens. We live in a busy world. We got a lot of things going on, and it takes us off the spiritual mountaintop into a place sometimes where we feel like we're spiritually empty. Now, the worst part is there are people who have been taught some things different than what the Bible actually teaches, and so they feel like when they get to those places, they no longer belong to the family of God. They're no longer saved. They have to get saved again. That would really be a miserable life, to think every time I got away from God, or every time I was not really on top of things like I ought to be, now I'm lost again. I would think that would get the best of people. I don't know. I'm thankful that I was taught and shown in the Bible what the Bible's got to say about it, and so those thoughts don't cross my mind, but I know they do a lot of people's because I talk to them. We've had people in here. We had a lady in here a few years back that she would call me. I don't think I'm saved anymore. So we would go through it, and we would talk, and she would tell me all these things, and then Okay, I'm saved. And then about 3 weeks later, she called me. I don't think I'm saved anymore. And today, she's in heaven. I don't think she wakes up saying, I don't think I'm saved anymore. I think she's got that figured out now. But it does happen to people. And so in those times when we're like that, instead of being on a mountaintop, we find ourselves walking through valleys. And we started last week talking about some of those valleys that we walk through in this life. And last week we looked at what I called the valley of crisis. And we all walk through them sometime. People in our church are going through those valleys right now, and many times when we get in that valley, we find ourselves panicking more than we do praying. We find ourselves more worried instead of trusting. But today, in Psalm chapter 84, we're going to look at a valley that we need to walk through. I call it the valley of tears. We need to go through there before we can actually be on that mountaintop that we was talking about with God. And in Psalms chapter number 84 and verse number 5, I'll read it when I get done. You're going to say, preacher, that didn't say a thing to me. Well, that's good, because then I'll get a chance to explain it to you. But Psalms 84 and verse 5, the Bible says, blessed is the man whose strength is in thee, in whose heart are the ways of them, who passing through the valley of Baca make it a well. The rain also filleth the pools. They go from strength to strength. Every one of them in Zion appeareth before God. O Lord God of hosts, hear my prayer. Give ear, O God of Jacob. Selah. So he talks about a valley, the valley of Baca. Now let me give you a little information here so you can stay up with me, and this will make a little sense, except I never turn while I'm preaching. I never turn in my Bible to a place. I always have them marked or written out so I don't have to. I forgot to do that. So if you will turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter number 16, I'll just since I'm going to be turning, it's going to take me forever to get there. I can stall while you're turning also. I watch preachers stand up here and talk and turn while they're doing that, and they just turn right to stuff. I can't do it. I'm in Exodus right now. I have no idea where to go. And I'm just whittling through here, and eventually it's going to be time to quit, and I'm not going to find whatever I'm looking for, Deuteronomy. You think I'm lying, but I'm not. And the worst part is I dream in the night that I'm preaching, and I can't find, and I wake up sweating. I mean, it's awful to preach in your dreams and you can't find where you're going to, and it happens all the time. But I'm going to get there in just a minute, and then I'm going to tell you what's going on here. I'm giving you a little background for what's going on here in these verses. Okay, I'm in Deuteronomy 16, and I'm going to read a verse here in just a minute. But here's what's going on. 3 times a year, the Jews were supposed to go back to Jerusalem to meet with God. And it was for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, Feast of Tabernacles. You read it if you're in chapter 16, look in verse number 16. Here's what it says. 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose, in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and in the Feast of Weeks, and in the Feast of Tabernacles, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty. So God had told him, this was a part of what he told his Israelites, I want you to come 3 times a year and present yourself and meet with God. I'm talking about mountaintops. I'm talking about times when we get with God and it's like the rest of the world's gone. And I tell people this a lot of times. When we go to family camp or we send our kids to camp, when you're in a camp, it's like it's like you step out of this crazy world that we live in, and you're in a place where you're just there, and it's like the Lord can really meet with you. You can't stay there. We go to family camp, we stay for a week, but you got to come home, and that's the same with this. But 3 times they was to go to these feasts, to these different things, and meet with God, and God had told them that. So as they make their way to Jerusalem to meet with God, they go through this valley of Baca that we just read about. It's a desert place. And Baca, if you look it up, that's why I call it Valley of Tears. That's what it means, tears. It was pretty rough on people. Now, they didn't have cars, they didn't have air conditioning, they didn't have nice chariots, they probably pretty well walked, and they're on their way to meet God, and probably most of them had to travel quite a distance, and they're tired, and just when they're really getting good and tired, they come to this valley, an awful place, a tough place. It's desert, and they've got to get through this to get to Jerusalem. And so by its name, the fact that they call it that, it kind of tells me, I think maybe some of them kind of broke down. I think maybe some of them just started crying. It's tough. And we do that. We get in valleys here in this world, and we face things that we don't want to face, and sometimes we just break down. Sometimes you just find yourself crying, and things are going on, and they have to go through this dry desert place on foot before they can get to their destination. Not a fun thing to do. And none of us want to go through those valleys. I don't know anybody that I've ever met in my life. Now, I've had some that said those things, but I don't know anybody that truthfully looks forward to it. Boy, I hope I have some valleys this week. I hope I have some really tough times and some desert places in my life. I don't know anybody that does that. But everybody wants the mountaintop. The way to get to the mountaintop, you got to go through the valley. And that's where the tough part is. And you're not going to get to the mountaintop to be with God until you find a place of brokenness in your life. What do I mean by that? Well, think about these people, these travelers. And it says the male, so I don't know if the families went. I didn't get all the details of it when I was reading all of it, but they would travel. When they were making their way to Jerusalem 3 times a year, by the time they got there, they were spent. Just even now, if you take a trip and you get in your vehicle, I mean, nice air-conditioned vehicles and pull them, you ran 500 miles in one day. At the end of the day, you're wore out. Well, these folks was on foot in a desert, and they was trying to get there, and they were spent. And if the long trip on foot didn't get to them, then the last part of it through that valley, it certainly would have got the best of them. And so they get to Jerusalem, and they're empty. There's nothing left in their tanks. And they're there to meet with God. Could I tell you the best time for you and I to meet with God? When we're empty. When we got nothing. Because otherwise we're kind of self-sufficient. We kind of think we're okay. We think we can do this and we can handle this. But when we're empty and we're broken and we're just to the place where God, I can't take another step unless you take hold of my hand. That's brokenness. And that's where God can meet with people. And it's a shame, but sometimes he has to do that to us so he just can meet with us, because we won't get there ourselves. And so I guess the question I want to answer today is, what's it take to get through that valley of tears? That's what it's talking about here. To meet with God, what's it take? And I'm going to mention 3 things that I'm reading here in these verses. The first, if you look there in verse 5, I'm back over in Psalms now. But in verse 5, it talks about, it says, in whose heart are the ways of them. Now, again, you read that, and you think, I don't know what in the world that's talking about. He's saying in their heart was set on this trip. This is what they was to do. This was a pilgrimage or a journey for them. Their heart was set on this. They was not going to settle for anything less than getting to Jerusalem and meeting with the Lord. They wasn't going to stop. They wasn't going to say, well, you know what, this is a tough trip. They was going. And it reminds me of the story back in, it's in Genesis, I think it's chapter number 32, if you remember Jacob there. He's wrestling with God. And Jacob set his mind, I'm going to stay in this fight until God blesses me. Now, it sounds, when you read it in the Bible, it sounds almost like Jacob was winning and God couldn't do anything about it. That's not the truth by far. But the fact is, Jacob was determined. He had his mind set, I'm not going to settle for anything less than God blessing me. And what happened? God blessed him. He changed his name from Jacob to Israel. And then, of course, Jacob named the place Peniel because he said he'd seen God face to face and he lived. He just thought he'd surely be dead after an encounter like that. But my thought is, what about your life? You ever find yourself settling? I'd like to really have a close time with God. Come to church, it's all right Sunday morning. It wasn't a bad service, but we really don't put a lot of effort into getting close to God and having that meeting. And a lot of God's people settle. Think about these Jews. They could have easily got down there, got 3/4 away, and said, you know what, this is just too much. I mean, we give it an effort, but I think we're going to head back home. No, it says their mind, they set their destination. Their heart was set on this journey. We're going to take this journey. We're going to go. And we're not going to stop until we're in Zion. If you and I turn around before we meet God, if you and I just settle, that's what it means. We're settling. If you can't even think back of a time when it really felt like you was in the presence of God, when it really felt like God was real to you, we've probably settled somewhere along the way. Doesn't mean you're not saved. It just means we settled for a lot less than what God wanted for us. God has something a lot more, and we ought to get to the place. You know what? I'm going to meet with God if I have to pray for 2 hours today. But when I leave here, I'm going to know that I've been in the presence of God. And now some of you might be thinking, preacher, I've never heard this idea about setting our heart and our mind to God. Well, you probably have heard it, but you probably just, when you read it through the Bible, you probably didn't pick up on it, or maybe you just kind of brushed through it. And so let me give you some verses, and you can write them down. You don't need to turn to them all. I'm just going to read some verses to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. In Romans chapter 8, here's what the Bible says. Verse 5 says, for they that are after the flesh. What's that? That's people who just live for the pleasures of this. If I got a desire for this, I got a desire for that, I'm living for my desires. People who are after the flesh, they do mind the things of the flesh. But they that are after the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. So he's saying those who live according to the flesh, they set their minds on things that would please the flesh, please the old self, the person that we are. But those who live according to the Spirit, they set their minds on things that would be pleasing to God, and it is very satisfying to them. Here's another verse, Colossians 3 says, if ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. Set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth. And again, where are we at most of the time? Our minds are focused on everything around us, and we don't think down the road. And even our decisions are based on what's right now and not what's right down the road and what's going to help us spiritually. And here's another one in 1 Peter says, wherefore gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Christ. So that's just a few verses telling us we have to set our mind that I'm going to have that closeness with God. I'm going to do what it takes. So where it takes more time praying, whether it takes more time crucifying the flesh, whatever it is, I'm going to have that time. But what happens when you set your mind on something? Well, here's what's going to happen. The devil's not going to like it, so he's going to try to stop you. The world we live in, it stands against anything that goes toward God, so it's going to work against us. And then our old self, the old nature that we still have, it's going to fight us. And it's going to try to throw us off course. But if our mind is set, if our heart is set, it won't keep us off course long. It might deter us a minute, but we'll come back. We'll get back on course. And this is probably a bad illustration, but I'll give you an idea. Our dog, Nick, she's 17 years old, little wiener dog. I don't even know why we got her. She's not a good dog at all. And nobody should have a dog like her, but we've had her for 17 years. And when was here in the parsonage, we would let her. I had a little fenced-in area out back, and she would go out, and somehow always she would find an area in that little building back there where a mouse had been, and she would start digging into the wood, into anything, and she would start barking, and it would drive me crazy. And so I would go out, and I would get her away from that, and I'd get her doing something else, and I'd think, okay, and I'd go back in the house, and within 2 minutes, right back digging, right back to barking, right back, and she wouldn't quit. And I thought, you know what? That's the way we need to be with God. Every now and then, the world's going to deter us and get us messed up, and every now and then, Satan's going to get in there, and he's going to trip us up, and we're going to fall, and we're going to get discouraged, or we're going to get down, or we're going to get off course. But as soon as I can break free from him, I'm going to get right back where I ought to be, and get back close to God. And that's what the dog does, and that's what these people did. And so the Jews, they set their heart to this journey. And you and I need to set our heart and our mind that I'm going to get to that mountain with God. Jerusalem happened to be a mountain. I'm going to get there. I'm going to set my mind on that, and we're going to get there. But then a second thing, I'm thinking about how can I get through this valley? How can I get to this mountaintop? Well, not only do I set my heart and mind to reach that destination, but I need to know where I can get some help along the way. Now, I don't know how some other people take trip, but verse 5, if I can find that verse, says, blessed is the man whose strength is in thee, and whose heart are the ways of them. So you see, he's pretty plain there. Our strength comes from the Lord. And I'm thinking about, okay, they're taking this trip. They have to do this 3 times a year. Where are they going to get some help from? Now, when you take trips, what do? Well, if you take a long trip, I don't know if everybody does this, but I think this is the way we normally do it, and I would think most people would do things similar to this. But if you take a long trip, you probably planned somewhere along the way where you're going to stop during the night. Now, I remember a couple years ago talking to Brad, decided they didn't need to do that. They'd just drive, and when it got dark, they'd get there. Then they couldn't find nowhere to stay. Almost had to stay in the car. It happens, and you got to be careful about that. So you plan ahead where you're going to stop, and then if you take a shorter trip, well, you plan, well, okay, we're going to stop here and eat. We're going to have a meal here, and I don't know if everybody does that, but I'll guarantee you, if we're going somewhere, I already know we're going to eat somewhere, or 2 or 3 times. And so as I set my heart and my mind that I'm going to reach this mountaintop with God, I need to plan on where am I going to stop to get my strength? Where's my stops going to be? Where's it going to be? And David's pretty clear about it. If you can hold your place here in Psalms 84 and turn over to Psalms 121, here's what David says about it in Psalms 121. He says this, he said, I'll lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. You see, he says, on this trip, I'm going to need some help. I'm going to need some strength and some place, and I'm going to have to get it from God. And in your trip, and your experience of trying to walk with God, you also need him to help you to do that, because you'll fail. You can't do it on your own. And one of my favorite verses, when I read these verses in Psalms, one of my favorite verses comes to mind. I'll read it to you. You don't have to turn, but it's in Isaiah chapter 40. And it goes on with what I preached on Sunday about being patient, about sometimes waiting. I almost preached on that tonight. How is it we're supposed to wait? I had that working on, then I changed it. But here's what Isaiah 40 says. It says, but they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. So where do I get my strength along this trip? Well, he says, wait on God. And when I say wait, I like to say this. I'm getting ahead of myself because I've got some things here in my notes what it means. But when you wait, if you go to a restaurant and somebody's waiting on you, does that mean they're sitting over there in a chair looking for you? No, they're taking care of it. They're coming over there. What do you need? You need a drink. You need this. You need that. That's what they're. When I'm waiting on the Lord and y'all renew, doesn't mean I'm sitting around saying, God, are you going to do something? Is sky's falling here? Nobody. No, that means I'm busy serving Him. I'm busy doing what I ought to be doing. And also I looked at there's a word I can't even say it. It means to wait, but also means to be attached to or to be gathered to. And it's a picture of the grapevines they had there in that area, where they would attach all kinds of things to them to hold them up, because the grapevines couldn't hold themselves up. They were so big. And I thought about some of you got your tomato plants. I don't have any tomato plants in those things. I used to have an amazing garden. I still get it every now and then. No one else has ever had a garden like it. When I lived over here in the parsonage, I would go out on the front porch, and overnight, tomatoes had grown, and peppers, and all kinds of things. And there they was on my porch in the chair. And I would go home, and a couple days later, there they would be some more of this stuff. And I don't know anybody else ever had a garden like that. But some of you raise your own tomatoes, and you got those big wire things out there, and all kinds of things to hold up those plants. And that's sort of what he's referring to. And I remember Jesus saying something about, we're the branches. We need some support, and He's the vine. He is the support. So now there's 2 things I know. If I'm going to get through this valley of tears, I know where I want to end up. I'm going to end up with God. I'm going to end up close to God. I'm going to end up where I'm supposed to meet Him, at Jerusalem in this case. And then I know who I need to call on when I need some help along the way. It's not like you get saved and life's easy now, I just travel. Life's still not easy. You got somebody to help you, but you got to call on Him. You're going to need some help. But then that brings me to probably what the hardest of all is, if I'm going to get through this valley of tears. I need to do what that helper tells me to do, even if it doesn't make sense. And I often use this story. Do you think it made sense when God told Joshua, now, we're not going to come in here and we're not going to bomb, or we're not going to do anything to Jericho here. We're not going to just come in here and try to run over the walls and try to climb. We're just going to walk around them. Do you reckon somebody, and the Bible doesn't say this, there had to be somebody out there who said, what are you talking about, Joshua? We can't. Nobody ever won a war walking around. We don't even have our weapons. They just walked. They didn't make sense, but they did what God said. You see, if I'm going to get through this valley of tears, and I'm going to get to the place where I got that real closeness with God, I'm going to have to do what God says, even if it doesn't make sense. And so here's what He says in verse 6. Says, they make it a well, the rain also filleth the pools. Now again, you're reading this, and I'm thinking about people taking this trip. You say, preacher, I think I know what you mean. God made them a well. No, it doesn't say that. They made a well. What did they do? Well, if they're going to put their trust in God for strength, God told them, dig some holes out there in the desert. Now, don't you reckon somebody said, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you dig a hole in the desert? Somebody had to say it, but I don't know if they said it. And so what they do, they dug holes in the desert. And what happened? God brought rain, and he filled those holes, and he made pools of water. And now, 3 times a year when they're going to Jerusalem, instead of wandering around out there thinking, we're going to die of thirst, there's nothing out here. They said, oh, we dug a hole out up here. There'll be some water in it. Sure enough, they got there. There's water. God put water there for them. He filled the holes. Now, it still wasn't a very easy trip, but it wasn't near as bad as it could have been because the helper helped them by providing pools of water in the desert. So, again, this is a short passage, just a few verses, but I read this and it gives me what I call keys to reaching a closeness with God, a mountaintop with God, if you want to call it that. That's what we've been talking about. One is I got to get my heart set on it. It's not going to just happen. You're not going to just wake up one day and say, boy, this is a great day. That seemed like the Lord really overwhelmed me with his presence. It doesn't work that way. You have to set your mind, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get with God. And then you also have to set your mind and set your heart, however you want to say it, that along the way, I'm going to need some help because I'm going to get tripped up. Satan's going to trip me up. The world's going to fight against me. My old self's going to fight. I'm going to need some help, and I'm going to need to get strength. And so I'm going to need him to help me along the way to stay that closeness. And even if I get off course a little bit, I'm going to get right back on course. And then the hardest thing of all, I'm going to do what he tells me to do. Whenever it doesn't matter if it makes sense, it doesn't make sense. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do whatever he tells me. And verse 7 there, and I've lost the verse 7, but it was in here in my Bible just a little bit ago. In verse number 7 says, they go from strength. Am I in the right place? Yes. They go from strength to strength. Every one of them in Zion appeareth before God. So it says they appear before God in Zion. How many of them? Everyone that decided he's going to do that. Everyone that followed the plan that he put there made it. Every one of them. Now, does that mean some people's not going to get to heaven? It's not talking about heaven at all. It's talking about a close walk with God. Everybody that decides I'm going to do it the way God says can have that close walk. It doesn't matter who it is. Everyone that started their journey this way and did it the way that God said, God seen to it that they was there. They appeared before him in Zion. They had their meeting with God, and you and I will too. He's promised us that. If you really desire the close times with God, you can have them. Anybody can have them. God says they're available for all. But a lot of God's people today have settled. We had a pretty good service, pretty good singing. I heard somebody singing. I didn't sing with them, but I listened to a couple of people singing, and we settle. And we don't really. At the end of the week, we can't say, boy, I just felt like I had a great week. God really walked with me this week, or I walked with him, however you want to say that. It doesn't happen for a lot of people because we're so focused on everything around us, and we don't focus on the things he tells us to. So he gives us some simple steps there. Set our heart on the journey. Decide I'm going to have that meeting with God, and when I need help, I'm going to get that help from him, and I'm going to do what he tells me along the way. Make sense or no sense, I'm going to do what he tells me along the way. And if you'll do that, I'm sure that you'll be able to look back and you can tell people, you know what, I had a great time. God really overwhelmed my life. God helped me. And again, I'm not saying this to make you think that you can live a Christian life and you can get to the point where there's no troubles, no problems, no sickness, none of that. You can get there, but you have to go to heaven to get there. So when you get to heaven, all those things that concern you here, none of them will concern you. It'll be a perfect place. It's kind of hard to imagine what it'll be like because there's nothing on this earth to compare, but it'll be like that. But until then, we can still have those close times with God if we do as he's laid out here. Now, thank you again for being here, being part of the service tonight. And if you've got a prayer list there with you, if you would just take a few moments, spend a little bit of time praying over part of that list. And then we hope to see you back here on Sunday, Mother's Day, be praying for moms, be asking some moms to come. It don't have to be just moms, but it's a special day. Bring everybody. Bring all the grandkids. Tell them it's Grandma's Day. It's Mother's Day. So bring everybody, and we'll see if we can fill this place up, and pray that God, but when you're doing all that other, make sure you pray also, because I don't have any magic spells, any magic things to say, but God can reach people's hearts. But it takes God's people praying. So I hope you'll do that. And then if you run out of stuff to do tomorrow and you don't want to mow grass, you don't want to paint walls or do anything, come on over here and help put together Bibles at Seed Line or Staple or something. There's always things going on around here. So jump in, and don't forget to look at the flowers on the way out, just in case it does frost. Let's go to prayer.